Hello again, everyone. This is another installment of MustardHub Voices Behind the Build. In these episodes, I sit down with the people building, backing, and running better workplaces. I'm your host, Curtis Forbes, and my guest today is Bill Mastin. Bill spent the last 20 years at the intersection of technology, people, and growth, helping organizations solve their most challenging issues around hiring, onboarding, retention, and performance. As CEO at Cadient, he's building solutions that help HR leaders move faster, scale smarter, and prepare their workforce for an AI-driven future. The belief that technology should amplify human potential, not replace it, is his drive. He believes that growth is less about headcount and more about capability, and that the best leaders are the ones who stay curious, stay humble, and never stop learning. And when he's not thinking about workforce evolution, you can find him in the mountains. He grew up moving around the U.S. and worked significantly in EMEA and APAC. So welcome to Behind the Build. Thanks for joining me, Bill.
Thank you so much, Curtis. I got to tell you, that was maybe one of the more graceful and nice intros that I've had. So thank you for that.
Scraped it off your LinkedIn.
It's great to be here. It's great to talk.
Well, I've been looking forward to it for a while, and you can thank LinkedIn, quite honestly. But let's start with your career path. You didn't start out in HR, so I'm really kind of curious what pulled you there and what attracted you to hiring and talent.
Yeah, I kind of came into HR tech kind of generally through the door of learning. So really the very short version is post-university, I ended up doing a program in AmeriCorps, worked in inner city schools for a couple of years as a volunteer, and then learned the technology. We were running a computer lab, and at the time it was Pearson software, which was like Success Maker, and it would help with test scores, and all of that. Mm-hmm. And I learned that package really well. So as soon as my kind of volunteerism ended, Pearson hired me, and so then I ended up start working in software companies. And really, what I'll tell you, what got me inspired in learning technology as a starting point was that I was observing in classes a fifth grade student, one that was doing ninth grade algebra, and one that couldn't read at first grade level. And the system was able to adjust and expose those students to content that they could actually consume and learn on their own path, like individualized learning paths for 1 hour a day, where they had, many hours a day in content that either was too easy or too hard for them. Yeah. So the power of like technology and the ability to integrate with like the way humans are learning or doing, or performing or whatever, that was kind of the start. And then I started working for some of the large learning management system companies, ended up working for a company called Think. We were acquired by Saba. We were doing massive projects, putting learning systems on submarines and the Australian Department of Defense and Cisco partner channel education. So then kind of ended up in corporate learning, and then tripped my way into organizations that we were acquiring HR technology companies. And I was kind of going in and leading turnarounds for some of those companies like PeopleFluent, NetDimensions, and then some very niche HR technology companies before I found my way to Cadient. So it's been interesting kind of to navigate that. HR is so fragmented. So even like under the blankets of HR, you've got all these different groups, talent acquisition to L&D to comp and benefits, and, global mobility, which is where I was the CEO of Topia, which was a global mobility platform. We helped organizations move people on assignment around the world. And do things like automate state-to-state withholding and some really tricky things that you would do on spreadsheets. We did in a system and automate. All of that stuff is up for massive disruption with what's coming in and what's happening right now. Like we're in this kind of in the middle section of this amazing movie of tech, and it's kind of still a little bit hard to predict what the ending is going to be at this point. So
Oh my God, you said it. Well, let's start with, before we get there, because I have a feeling we have a lot. We're going to go deep. Tell us about Cadient Talent. What does it focus on? What kind of organizations typically come to you for help?
So I would put Cadient Talent at kind of the intersection point and the point of trying to leverage some of the AI technology that is on the streets now. But not only that, look at really points of problems that organizations have in people management, people hiring, retention. Historically, Cadient has focused on high volume hiring customers. So customers that have retail, manufacturing, healthcare, where they're hiring a lot of people. We've built in our core applicant tracking system some very specific features and functions that support things like pooling, evergreen recs, those kinds of things that not all applicant tracking systems have. That being said, that is that's part of our core business. It's been there for a long time. I would say the last 18 months, really the focus has been to start to build much more flexible, modularized technology that can plug into anyone's HR ecosystem, whether it's sourcing problems for recruiters that are struggling with finding the right candidates, screening technology. So, in the world of recruiting right now, one of the biggest problems you have is a recruiter opens up their
Mhm.
inbox, they've put a job posting out there, and they see 200 resumes that all look like unicorns, right? Because AI has taken a job description and they've taken the resume and they've said, AI, make my resume perfect for this job. So there's a lot of, I almost see it like this kind of existential battle of like companies battling AI that's coming in from on the recruiting side with their own versions of AI to try to, figure out. I mean, I've already had some customers that have found video interviews where the candidates are using deep fakes to perform an
Wow.
interview. So there's all kinds of stuff. Like there's so many things going on right now. We're helping organizations navigate all of that. And we've had this core SaaS platform. We've got a smart suite set of products that help across all kinds of different areas that span from retention or from recruiting to retention. So now that's kind of where we're focusing. And right now, I think the future of SaaS full stop is more flexible than what we have done historically. So all SaaS companies, I think, need to evolve with the times and really just get back to solving core problems with the customers have and helping them be successful. That's going to be the future of, I think, all SaaS, but definitely the way that I want to take Cadient.
You talked about, some of these categories, or verticals that have, or that hire lots and lots of people frequently, right? Probably industries that suffer from, turnover in excess of 100% annually, right? You're
Right.
you're you're sort of focusing on these groups. Um, what do you think is a huge misconception? I think that business leaders might have about hiring. But second, you know, when they say, you talked about, sometimes there might be 200 resumes that all look incredible. When they say that we can't find good people, what's really going on underneath that statement?
Right. Well, so there's a few interesting things. Let me start with, um, some of the misconceptions are like when there's a 100%, 130% turnover of of an organization annually, and this happens a lot in retail brands, and stores selling shoes, whatever, and and so one of the challenges is that the talent acquisition team that's responsible for the hiring and filling a pipeline of candidates to fill that in, once the hiring finishes, they're stakeholders in retention, but they're not really the owner of retention. Often that hands off to the store manager or whatever. So we actually have built some technology. One of the products we have is Smart Tenure that will actually utilize AI to compress data, not only on the candidate you're hiring or the potential candidate you're hiring, but also the trends in that industry and the data from that specific company. It's called smart tenure, and it'll actually predict the likelihood of an employee staying and how long. Why does this matter? In some retail environments, the average tenure is like 45 days,
Yeah.
and it costs anywhere from 3,500 to 5,000 to of lost productivity, replacement fees, and training to get that person up to speed. So we have, and that's in retail with kind of lower cost positions. You go into things like healthcare and nursing and knowledge workers, and all of a sudden it's not a 3,000. It sometimes goes to 1x, 2x salary of lost productivity, replacement fees, and lost productivity on the other side while they get up to speed. So the problem I think that a lot of the C-suite doesn't necessarily always they don't look at it holistically from we're going to hire and we're going to retain. Can we even predict who's going to stay and what the cost impact to my business is? They've baked in and assumed 130% turnover, let's say. What if we could take that through predictive analysis down to 75%? You're talking about a significant bottom line impact to a company if you were to implement the right technology to help you better predict candidates and their longevity, but also give them a way to communicate up the chain and that's our smart feedback tool. So we've built a lot of technology about this. On the other side, your other question about what's happening with 200 applicants, there's just so much waves of AI that are happening, and every day a new tool, a new technique, a new hack comes up. There was a fascinating study and report that got dropped about 3 weeks ago now. Forbes published that 45% of the job listings are fake.
The
And
listings are fake.
job postings are fake.
Wow.
So then you say, okay, well, let's put on pause for a second the 200 applicants that are trying to find a job and they all look the same and they're all perfect. What's going on with the hiring of the companies? Like, what are they doing? And there's a variety of reasons that is happening. One is there's data farming, right? So they're posting positions. They're leaving positions up, posting positions to get not only data, but to if they've had a reduction in force and they've planned to rehire, but they're delayed because they're waiting to see policy or economy or macro events play out, they may say, well, look, we're to their teams, we've posted the position, we're looking for the right person, but then they never actually execute on that. So there's a lot of variety of reasons why organizations are keeping positions up, but I thought that number was much higher than I had expected.
That's an insane statistic. Certainly higher than I had expected too. Would you say then that some of the hiring challenges are more about talent availability, or about processes, decision making?
Well, I think then the other thing that you see is while the the macro events are causing some organizations to be slower to hire, and I mean the jobs reports out, and the data is the data of like what the hiring is going on, but it's kind of interesting. It's a job isn't a job. It's not apples and oranges, right? Like somebody gets laid off from a knowledge worker job in Amazon or Microsoft, and then maybe they find work in another role, but it wasn't that same pay or whatever. But we're at this perfect inflection point while there's this macro events that are occurring that are causing some organizations to pause growth initiatives and hiring. Others are, by the way, like if you're a AI company, you're building data centers. So it's very specific to the kind of, business you're in. But I think the challenge that you're also seeing is, AI wrapping employees, actually even replacing employees in some case. So I was at the Silicon Slopes event last week in Utah, in Salt Lake City. It's a tech conference, and And you just get to see this kind of great cut of how organizations and software companies and all companies really in Utah are leveraging tech. There was a company there that has a staffing agency for digital employees, basically AI agents that now they're going to help staff companies with. So if you think about organizations that are at that point of like, okay, should we hire? Should we, hold for a little bit and see how this plays out, whether we can leverage some of the technology now to do things at a more, an advantageous cost basis. Put
That's
aside the existential crisis of that to the workforce and humanity, but just say, okay, from a company perspective, they're driven by profit motive. They respond to the
yeah.
shareholders. They have to reduce costs and increase profit. I mean, that's going to be the game until that whole game changes, which I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Talk to me about what you saw there. Talk to me about this company. If somebody is playing with this idea of, bringing on agents instead of, human beings, does that fundamentally change that hiring process? How do you go about the hiring process in the event that you're looking to bring on an AI agent? What does that even look like?
Yeah. So from an agent perspective, like I'll just tell you, so that from that company's perspective, they're focusing in first role base, right? Sales SDRs, right? Outbound SDRs, picking up the phone, AI agent calling out, sending emails, things like that. There's other agents that they've spun out too. So they had about 5 or 6 that they were trying to say, hey, these are, staffing, you know, agents that you can use and hire. I'll tell you from Cadient's perspective, we've already got a couple that we're selling. When I think about our screening technology, conversational AI to call to a candidate and screen. So say we have those 200 candidates, we can actually have a smart screen is our tool that will set up a call time, then call the person, have a conversation, track and report so that the recruiter can then look across those 200 and say, okay, these are the top 5 that I'm interested in. Now, we're not trying to decide for the recruiter. We still want the recruiter on hand on the wheels and in charge of this, but that recruiter doesn't have to have 200 conversations. They don't need 10 recruiters having conversations with people. They can leverage AI. Now, I think that experience, the jury's still out. Will that experience stand the test of time? Will candidates want to work for a company that's leveraging that or not? Like, I think some of this technology we're launching, we're working with our customers to try it out, and we'll see. That's one example. Another one is a product we have called Smart Communicate, which is basically an level 1 HR support desk that's a agent. So we have just like we've got a special kind of proprietary LLM that we've designed around this. You load in your PDFs, your documents, your benefits programs, all those things, and then have a question about my vacation balance, or I have a question about what is the policy for parental leave for maternity leave or something like that. I ask the agent first, and then if I need to get something more, I go straight to the or it escalates fast to the human behind it supporting it. My point is that these kind of layers are going to help make the recruiting team be more strategic. But you can't avoid the question of like, well, does that mean you only need 1 or 2 recruiters for a business instead of
Right.
20?
I'm
Like, that is a
curious.
question. That's a question.
Yeah, when I'm curious when I think about these autonomous, recruiters calling and having these conversations, having hundreds of conversations, so that the human doesn't have to. Um, What kind of guardrails are up to make sure that in this distillation process of information, right? Just the distillation of information that goes on in these conversations, that it's being put together in a way so that that candidate has that best foot forward. Do you ever hear that as being a concern? Does it ever
Oh, yeah.
miss things?
Oh, yeah. So there's probably 2 kind of in the recruiting space, there's probably 2, um, big lighthouse moments right now of what's going on. We've got a lawsuit that has been filed, that goes to court, later this year, against Workday, and they had automated, and really the guts of that, when you boil it down, is, the candidates got together and sued Workday because they were applying to jobs for different companies that were running Workday, and then they were getting automatically declined, like within seconds, right after application. So no human interaction overseeing. It was automated and it was automatic, and they raised a lawsuit for that. The second one just hit about 2 weeks ago against Eightfold.ai, and that was around, and not the auto, but it was really the auto matching without giving any kind of notice or um, getting approval from the employee to be measured, or for the candidate to be measured by AI about their capability. So you have to get consent. You have to, so what we've tried to do is be very careful about, we're not having AI automate the task um, without human interactivity. That's one aspect of it. But there's heightened scrutiny. There will be continued to be heightened scrutiny and legal focus on this area. Um, the standard that we've got, and we've built an entire kind of anti-bias page and document to prove kind of transparency, right? We want transparency to anyone from the candidate to the company so they could defend why that this isn't some kind of magic black box. So we've built all that. The next step is to take that through a process which we've started, which is ISO 42001, I think is the specification. So that's a standard, which is an anti-bias AI standard, which is gaining traction. And I think all B2B AI platforms will have to adhere to that, just like you have to adhere to SOX, to compliance, and like all of these kind of security requirements and AI requirements. Like there'll be a hardening. Things are moving so fast, but there will be heightened scrutiny, and then an outcome is a higher focus around compliance and making sure that your solutions are not biased. In the recruiting space, I'll just end on this. You have to maintain 7 years of hiring records. The EEOC is very focused on discriminatory hiring practices, so you have to be able to defend that you've hired in a non-discriminatory way, and that is at least 7 years of data you need to maintain for companies of any kind of significant size.
I'm kind of curious. First of all, you just covered a ton of ground, and so which is good. No, like I like that. I love it, but it a lot of different things kind of make me come to the same or a similar question, right? When it comes to how we're hiring, who we're hiring, the role that AI has in the hiring, whether it's in the sourcing or in the workflow of interviews, right, or distilling that information, or if we wind up hiring the AI bots. I guess the question that I was having, and I feel like I'm about to get another waterfall of information here based on the question alone, but there's a cost to these things, not just financially, but culturally and operationally, right? There's of even, and sometimes it's the cost of getting it wrong, right? Sometimes there's a cultural cost of even getting it right when you start using a lot of these tools, either to replace or enhance or augment somebody's work. And I'm just kind of
Yeah.
curious, like, you talk to customers all the time. What do you see in terms of their own, organizational health, right? That sort of cultural or operational cost that comes along with these changes.
Yeah, I mean, look, it really becomes almost I mean, a cultural, but it's almost an existential question as you start, looking at how integrated this technology is coming in now into our lives. It really is pervasive. If you're a knowledge worker and you're not leveraging kind of all the tools, then you're just behind. Like you can't keep up. Um, and but I'll give you one thing that I thought was fascinating. There was a study last summer that got released that showed somewhere around 15% of millennials would prefer an AI manager than a real manager. Um,
Wow.
I will
Okay.
tell you that I have since questioned my daughter's at the university, freshman, and I've questioned personally her friends, and almost all of them answer was they would prefer an AI manager. And I start to question why. Well, like what's it says, well, we don't have to deal with the like the I mean, the way I heard it, the human bias,
Yeah.
right? And that's the I don't have to worry about trying to deal with my manager who's, emotional wreck because they didn't have enough coffee this morning or whatever. Like it's consistency. And now, I always think of it as like, well, there's the carrot and then there's the stick. And eventually, like consistency, to get you in the door, and but as the pressure gets turned up in any business, performance, needs to stretch and increase and all of that. And you may not have with those kinds of technologies or those management structures the latitude, right, to be able to discern risk and assess, like, okay, I'm going to give this because some of your best employees, I mean, the best people that I've ever employed, like, I had to help them and they helped me on a mutual journey to get to a very successful state. Like, that is an investment of time and energy. And that nuance is going to be really interesting to see if these systems would ever be able to pick up on that. I tend to think that is the secret sauce of human, but time will tell whether that's true or not. But yeah, I think the last thing I'll say on it is we have a technology called Smart Feedback, which does this conversational AI not for the candidate, but for the employee. So imagine polling your workforce in a non biased way and a non confrontational way. New employee, day one, day five, day 30, exit interview. You can pull that in a consistent way to say, okay, are you happy? Where are you at with your, um, and where they may not be comfortable telling their manager that they're really mad that there's no Twinkies in the break room anymore, because they changed that. They would tell the AI that, right? Because they're like, oh, and or if they're looking for a job, if they're really unhappy with their pay or something else, they may expose that to a
Interesting.
non-confrontational, like, polling AI, and then think about the management bias that exists, in human bias that exists in the management chain of
Sure.
organizations for a C-level executive to be able to get insight into their workforce and the real risk that's going on there. That's kind of
Sure.
a different idea, and maybe addresses that what we talked about before, having a 130% turnover. If you could change that dynamic, you start to have real world results for your business and for the people working there. So,
Yeah, that's yeah, I can totally see how interacting with AI, there's this technology veil, right? Where you don't necessarily feel or wouldn't feel judged the way that you might by a human. So your answers could be more open or, more honest, or I don't know, think of another adjective, but just simply because you're not being stared in the eyes by another human being that you might look up to, or you might respect, or you might not like, or you
mhm.
might be terrified of, or a whole bunch of things. That's really interesting. when a candidate's going through this pre-hire process, I feel like they learn a lot about the company's culture,
Yeah.
and even insofar as how they use AI, or how they're incorporating it into different elements of the business.
Mhm.
Um, what what do they learn about a company before they even start the job? What are the signals that you think are louder than others that you see just most prevalent?
I think that people that are really out looking, for and of course the whole spectrum is in the high volume world. You're using job boards like Indeed and by the way, that's kind of a facilitating you know technology of why there's 130% turnover, because in that retail world they do things like, hey, there's a concert next Tuesday I want to go to, so I'm going to quit this job because I got two other jobs that I can go apply to through this easy access for automatic applying to jobs. But I think to your point of like, well, what do they find out about the culture of a company? Like, I do think, I mean, AI can actually support more effective communication in some ways. Being able to do things like give a chat, an LLM chat experience on the front end of a job listing, right? To be able to find out about what is the culture of this company and have real answers given up without having to feel like you're Sherlock Holmesing and go into Glassdoor and find all these things out, which you should do anyway, right? You
Mhm,
should
mhm.
investigate any company before you decide to hitch your wagon to it. But I think that it can help that. Um, I don't know yet if we're at that tipping point of, you know, there'll be an anti, and there already is an anti AI reaction and repulsion as well. So it's like finding that balance is probably going to be something that organizations have to figure out how to do. Um, because it's I don't think it's going to be a one size fits all kind of situation. I think I like you can leverage some technology to actually surface things like, this is the culture, this is how we operate, this is our values, and help any candidates understand that. And then there'll be other organizations that just go over the line. And I mean, you take a look at some of the big news, the big layoffs and kind of radical transformations that are going on in some of the big tech companies right now.
Mhm.
The developer is under extreme pressure and fire, because that has been one of the first places that AI has
Yeah.
automated at scale. And the ability to I mean, vibe code is I mean, yes, vibe coding and being able to create a simple app and deploy it to test it out. Will it then be productized? Can you? But the ideation and the deployment of that stuff, I mean, you can do things in minutes and hours that used to take weeks and days and months.
Yeah,
So
it's amazing.
so it is. So it's like that. And you go look, actually, the data. I wish I would have brought the graph. 2022, 23, the spike on Indeed for software engineers, it was in the US, hundreds of thousands of job postings. It was like a couple 100,000 job postings. Now it's down to like less than like 25,000 or whatever it is across the US. It was completely fallen off a cliff, because not that there's less code being written, but the people that are in seat are not scaling by hiring extra devs. They're rolling out that Claude or whatever they're going to use to
Yeah.
write across faster. So that whole dynamic is happening too. And then some, but I do think there'll be a bit of a kickback. Um, and some companies they're gonna have to navigate this and come up with the right policy and governance so that you know they can hire. I mean, companies that are fully AI and have a CEO and AI isn't good. Like,
Yeah.
that's not competitive. Like, you have to, you know, I think you need the human element, I believe, but again,
Well,
time will tell on that too.
Let's look at towards the future.
Mm-hmm.
I want to hear some predictions for kind of what's coming down the pike. What you feel like the next generation of candidates will want from an employer, maybe in how they work and where they work, maybe in some expectations of the hiring process, everything. Is it agents? Is it smarter hiring? Feedback tools?
So I'm going to tell you a couple stories, and but before I do that, I mean, I am a technologist and have spent my career in software and SaaS and technology, and overall, I've been very optimistic about how technology can increase the profitability and company it's been a um, there's a lot of good that's come from where we're at. It feels like we're at this kind of really interesting inflection point now where um, the technologies that we're talking about now and it very well could be, by the way, that the people at the start of the Industrial Revolution were having the same doom Chicken Little experience that a lot of people are having today of like, hey, this is gonna you know destroy our jobs, and who knows what the future is, and that kind of uncertainness of transformation and change.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a constant of like human society and culture, and we're always doing that. We're reinventing, we're trying to change things, and there's a lot of good things that are happening because of the boon of technology and AI with gene therapy and solving genetic disorders and all kinds of stuff. It's crazy. Crazy good. The head of Anthropic, Claude AI, resigned this week in kind of very public fashion, sent a public resignation letter. Basically said the world's falling apart. The People don't really understand what's going on with AI, even though we think we do because we're using LLMs to write our emails. He goes, "You don't really understand, so I'm going to quit and I'm going to go into the woods and write poetry." Basically, that was his. The world's falling apart, so I'm going to go write poetry, which I thought was fascinating. Outcome of that. I think that we're going to see the continuation of adoption to these things. I think our governments are going to respond. They're not a very proactive. They always respond. I mean, pretty much every government in the world responds reactively to something that's changing. So whether it's policy and controls, like they're going to have to figure out because the game on the playing field of work and the monetization of your hours to product to pay. And I don't know if universal basic income will fix it. I don't know what's going to fix it. All of it doesn't seem like it's going to solve some of the changing in work situations that we have. But as far as like companies hiring and taking advantage, I really think you're going to be able to see companies launch with very few people and go unicorn, like solo level people that could get to huge valuations, huge impact to our society with new products and services that are very small teams. So the future could look very much more like gig economy. Could be we're having multiple things we're doing simultaneously, and it becomes less like W-2 employees and more part-time gig world. I will tell you this horror story. The first AI agent last week I saw on they went I think it was a Claude bot, spun up and actually hired a human completely autonomously to go rentahuman.com or whatever, went on and hired a human to go across town and pick up a package and deliver it somewhere else, completely independent of any other human interaction. We've had the first like observation where an agent hired a human to do a task for a completely disconnected kind of entity that was a human behind the agent, obviously, but that human didn't actually go through the hiring process. The agent did. That's fascinating because you could then start to really, like, if you were to say recruiting becomes completely automated, which I don't see that in the near term, especially because the scrutiny in legal, you start to see that could really be interesting, of like hiring, firing, and I just don't think, with the laws even as they're in place today, before they evolve, there'll be a lot of lawsuits flying and all of that. So there's going to be an interesting dynamic of how that happens in the future as well.
Any predictions for the future of HR tech? Like, shifts for that specifically, bigger or small, not just predictions in the future of work and how it's
Yeah.
actually done, but what about on the technology side on HR tools?
So the tech side, I think, needs to get a lot more specific. I think the SaaS industry built product, and for many years, and I benefited from this as part of that industry, and we would lay down that product over and over and over for customers in the HR tech world, and basically kind of they would align their their workflow to our product, kind of under the umbrella of best practices, right? And we kind of got it consistent, and there was value. All organizations were kind of doing some things that are very similar, and there was some legal checks and balances and things like that. However, I do think that there was also at times, not always, but at times, you lost the nuance of that company, the problem that they had, and maybe the culture that they had, all of a sudden had to sit within a framework and a process that they didn't design, they didn't really have. I think the future of the technology can be a lot more specific and custom, even under the umbrella of subscription software, or however that looks in the future. um, I think pricing models will change. I think you'll be more outcome based versus subscription. They still want cost certainty, so they got to figure out a way to have cost certainty in budgets, but they want to be charged on outcomes versus actual, just an annual subscription. So that's a whole level of complication, and that we have to navigate. But things like dashboards, integrated, you know, data. How do you do that? Well, the future is going to be more like, okay, tell me, what my hiring trends are in New York, and how many people am I behind? How many people do I? And it can just answer that question. You don't need reports dropped into your email, once a week. You need actual live interactive data that you can operationalize in action. So all of those things are up for grabs now in a new way than they were even 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think I see a lot of that stuff coming. I kind of love this idea of how software can become hyper personalized. Which I think is actually really promising. I mean, I think that
Yeah.
that's it would be an incredible thing to look forward to. To wrap it up, I'm always really interested to hear, um, Bill. If a business leader wanted to build a strong team, but really kind of feels maybe overwhelmed by hiring or sort of uncertain, the best way to kind of go about doing these things, or even making a decision if it's human or non-human that they need to go. What's the single most important piece of advice that you would give somebody in this, who's sort of approaching these things right now? What do you tell folks?
I think when I'm looking to hire, really throughout the organization, whether it's leader or someone that's relatively individual contributor, on a project level or whatever, it's about their ability to adapt and learn. And it's one of the reasons I kind of had always fallen in HR and learning technologies and all of that. I got really excited about it because there's always so many angles to it. But someone's ability to, willingness to not stand on their learnings and their history and say, hey, I did this, I did that. Yeah, it's fine. But there's really, especially in the climate we're in, there really is no cut and paste. Like, you have to put your hands on keyboards. You have to play with things. You have to learn, even in retail where you're selling products for a store, like, the buyers have changed. What attracts them has changed. So it really is, and maybe that's some of that's in that climate, social media, in a knowledge workers climate like the technology. But we are in a massive period of change. I think there was a period of time that felt very stable. I don't think it was, but I think it felt stable in a lot of ways, especially in the US. But that time's gone now. And now it's back to scrappy learning, trying, which means you're failing, and building being able to participate in a learning culture. And then, that's what I would say is if people can do that, then they can be successful anywhere.
I love it. That's good advice. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you. It was great. I felt like I talked too much. I felt I wanted to hear more from you, but I spent the time talking. Sorry about that.
We'll save that for the next time. Big thanks to all you watching and listening to MustardHub Voices Behind the Build. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Please visit mustardhub.com to learn more about MustardHub and discover how we help companies become destinations for workplace happiness and turn culture into a competitive edge. Until next time.